Resume. The recording. This program is being recorded. We'll try to share this online. Again, like the webinar format is helpful in that regard, right? So your questions can be asked like anonymously or with your name in the Q&A portion. We'll try to open the chat as well in case anybody would like to come in over there. But in the meantime, we want this to be as interactive as we can do it on a virtual basis. And if you don't want to put your question in writing, just like raise hand, we are going to unmute you and you can ask your question at that point on audio as well. But once again, at CAIR Pennsylvania, CAIR Philadelphia, and CAIR Pittsburgh, we are pleased to offer this program to talk about ICE, talk about concerns with law enforcement agencies, lawlessness on our streets that is spearheaded by supposed law enforcement agencies, travel concerns. We are seeing increased number of secondary screenings. And of course, as we've said, inshallah, we are looking forward to welcoming the month of Ramadan and Ramadan accommodations. With that, I'm going to pass the microphone over to you, Brother Adam. Bismillah, please take us up.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thank you for joining. Thank you, Ahmet. So yeah, tonight we're just gonna go over, basic, like what are civil rights, what rights we have, and then, how we can interact with law enforcement, and then ICE specifically, travel considerations, job accommodations at jobs, in the workplace, at school. Inshallah, this can be interactive. We'll try to make it as interactive as possible. So if you do have questions, definitely don't hesitate to put them in the chat. Because some of this stuff is like baseline information, but if there's specific things that are going on, we can talk about those as well. Do want to give a disclaimer before we start that this is not legal advice. There's no attorney-client privilege over this Zoom meeting. So if you do have, questions personal to you, feel free to reach out. We'll put our contact information in the chat. Reach out to us directly and we can, provide one-on-one legal guidance. All right, so I'm going to try to share my screen. Bear with me. Okay. So we're gonna start. What are civil rights, right? They're legal protections for all people, regardless of their immigration status, right? It prevents discrimination based off of race, national origin, religion, sex, gender, and other characteristics. These rights are civil rights. They're guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution and laws that have been passed by Congress, and then also, the state constitutions and laws passed by the state legislatures. Some of the most important, right, amendments and rights that we have, like under the First Amendment, especially for the Muslim community, right? Freedom of religion. People talk about the First Amendment a lot, but with freedom of religion, it prevents the government from actually establishing a national religion or favoring one religion over another. So it would be unconstitutional for the government to tomorrow wake up, Trump, Congress, anybody passing a law or an executive order or something saying that America is a Christian nation or even America is a Muslim nation, right? If that wouldn't be constitutional. So the government can't choose one religion and it can't prefer one religion over another, but at the same time, the government has to allow you to practice your religion freely. As long as you're not breaking any laws, you're allowed to practice your religion without the government encroaching or telling you you can't do that, or you can't pray this way, or you can't practice this way. The government has to have a hands-off approach. Similarly, under the First Amendment, right, we also have the right to protest, the right to assemble. You have freedom of speech, so you can express yourself freely, whether through speech, writing, or other forms of expression. You can criticize the government, share ideas, participate in public debates. You can stand on the corner, pass out pamphlets. You can do that for political actions. You could do that for religious, right? Like you can stand on the corner and pass out religious brochures. That is entirely legal and constitutional. The government can't stop you from doing that. Um, Now, with freedom of speech, something that's important to distinguish is that the government can't infringe on your freedom of speech, right? So any entity that's considered the government, whether it's the federal government, state government, local government, school districts, right? A public school district is a government entity. They can't infringe on your freedom of speech. A private school, a private employer theoretically can infringe on someone's freedom of speech. It's just that the government can't be picking and choosing what speech they like or what speech they don't like. If an employer says, oh, we don't want to hire this individual because of their political views, that is constitutional, or not constitutional. It's not unconstitutional. I don't want to say that it's a good thing because it's not a good thing, but there wouldn't be any like constitutional recourse with that. Um, I think that's, we see this really in the educational context where at public schools, public universities, students have a lot more protest rights than at private universities. Now, moving on, right, to the Fourth Amendment. That prevents the government from intruding upon your person, home, business, and property without a valid search warrant or a valid arrest warrant, um, which requires a belief rising to the level of probable cause, right? If the government wants to search your house, they need a warrant that's signed by a judge. The warrant, when they get this warrant from the judge, they have to articulate specific facts that would lead, reasonably lead to conclude that a crime was being committed there or that the individual who committed a crime is there. The Fourth Amendment, it provides protections, right? Stop and frisk laws, safety inspections, wiretaps and surveillances, right? The Patriot Act, all those things where the government is intruding, spying on you, listening. There are legal mechanisms for which the government has to go through in order to do that. It's not saying that the government can't do it, but they have to do it the proper way. And that's something that we're seeing now as we start to, talk more in this presentation, right? Certain things, concepts like this, where the government can't just break into people's houses, can't just break into cars just randomly. We're seeing ICE behave differently than we've seen any type of law enforcement behave like before, because they're not really adhering to these Fourth Amendment protections and other constitutional protections. But those are generally right. There's a lot of other um, amendments, right? The Equal Protection Clause. We also have then different laws like the Civil Rights Act, that provide like protection against discrimination. Um, so this right here is what is needed for law enforcement to enter your home, right? This is a search warrant signed by a judge. Without this, law enforcement cannot enter your home, your office, your car, unless you give them permission. Uh, if you're presented with a search warrant, our recommendation is to always have them pass it underneath the door. Don't open the door. Have them pass it underneath the door and then look at it. Does it have your name? Does it have your address? Is it correct? If it's not correct, they could be talking about somebody else. If law enforcement, I think another key thing is to make sure that it's signed, right? They could potentially hold up a piece of paper without it being signed by a judge, and people are like, oh, they have a warrant, I have to let them in. When it wasn't signed by a judge, right? Make sure the warrant is correct. Now, if law enforcement is asking for permission to come in, they likely don't have permission. They likely don't have a warrant. If they have a warrant, they're not going to ask for permission because they can go into your house, right? They're going to go in pretty quickly. So if law enforcement shows up, don't let them in unless they present this. That's like our golden rule, right? You don't have to let them in, so exercise that right. Like letting them in can lead to additional problems. You can start to answer questions. You could get nervous, right? So you have a right to meet with law enforcement with an attorney. You don't have to say anything to them without an attorney. So exercise those rights. Um, right, law enforcement needs a warrant signed by a judge to search your office or home. You don't have to let them in. Ahmet, says that our motto is don't invite the FBI in for Shay. Like a lot of people, they think, oh, I have nothing to hide. I'll invite them in. I'll answer any questions they have. I'm a good, like, law-abiding American, um, living in America, right? I want to, contribute. I want to help society. What problems could come by answering questions? Well, a lot of problems have come, right? If you don't have an attorney with you, if you misspeak, you say something wrong, law enforcement can put pressure on you. They can lie to you. You can't lie to law enforcement. If they say, oh, you misremembered when's the last time you traveled to Egypt. Maybe it was 2018, but you said, oh, it was 2016. Maybe it shouldn't be a big deal, but if you're in the room by yourself, law enforcement can push on that, right? And they say, well, why are you lying to us? And then they start to get you flustered, right? And then maybe you don't know, you just get tongue-tied or you just start saying anything, right? Having an attorney there can prevent those types of situations. Additionally, right, we've had members of the community find listening devices in their home after meeting with law enforcement, right? It's not beyond law enforcement to do that in the same chair, right, that they were sitting at, they find something. So law enforcement, they can lie, they can, they play good cop, bad cop. They have a lot of like tricks and tools at their disposal. You have the right to have an attorney. Um, you have a right to not answer their questions without having an attorney present. So exercise that right, right? They're going to use all the tools that they have. You should use the tools that like you have and that you're constitutionally provided. Something is important, right? Never lie or provide false information. You don't have to speak to them, but if you do, don't lie, right? Because lying is illegal. Not speaking to them is not illegal. If you do have any, run-ins or encounters with law enforcement, get the name, agency, telephone number, badge number, any type of information you can get. Um, Now, law enforcement can hold people for brief periods for questioning. If you are not under arrest, you are free to leave. Um, you can ask the police officer if they stopped you and they're asking questions, officer, am I being detained or am I free to leave? If they say you're free to leave, leave, right? Um, if you're not free to leave, you still don't have to answer any questions, right? You have to provide theoretically something identification, or for them to identify you somehow, right? I think you have to provide that. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to provide your ID, right? There's not a law that says you have to have an ID on you at all times and have to provide it. But theoretically, law enforcement could possibly take someone to the police station to identify them. But providing your ID would eliminate the need for that, right? Um, Anytime you're speaking with law enforcement, have an attorney present. You have that right, so exercise that right. Like one, it just when there's somebody else in the room that theoretically, knows the law and that will could go after, law enforcement for disobeying the law, right? Having that check there just kind of evens the playing field. Um, Now, if you are arrested, do not physically resist arrest, even if you believe the arrest is unfair, unlawful, unconstitutional, even, right? Don't physically resist. If there is an unlawful arrest, you can challenge that, right? If law enforcement barges into your house without a warrant, you can challenge that after the fact. And, right, if they did actually go into the house illegally, anything they find gets thrown out and it can't be used in the case against you. Right. So instead of risking, if you get into a physical altercation with law enforcement, they're going to charge you for assaulting a law enforcement officer, right? So avoid that. Um, don't physically resist because then even if, right, you can beat the underlying charge, you can beat why they are going to your house in the first place, but then beating the assault on an officer charge is going to be difficult, right? So I know in those situations though, right, it's going to be tough, but you can challenge it and reach out to CAIR, right? This is the type of work that we do. So if something illegal happens, we try to hold institutions, police agencies, law enforcement agencies, government agencies, we try to hold them accountable, right? Now, if you are arrested, say you wish to remain silent and say you want to talk to your attorney, right? Say, I'm going to remain silent and I want to talk to my attorney. Don't give any explanations, excuses. Don't try to talk your way out of it. Once you're arrested, anything you say, it's not the police officer's not gonna be like, oh, okay, sorry, we got this wrong, and take the cuffs off of you, right? It's not gonna help. So just don't say anything. You have that right. If you can't afford an attorney, the government has to provide you an attorney in the criminal context, right? So that's where you have your public defender, and then other attorneys, right? For immigration, the government does not need to provide an attorney. However, there are organizations that do right pro bono immigration work. Um, there's also immigration attorneys who do this work. We do have partners that we work with to try to help out individuals because we don't do direct immigration work here at CAIR. Um, but sorry, I want to check the chat. 1 second. Oh, okay. Um, okay.
I'll
So
bring if there are questions or anything, Adam. I'll bring to your attention. I know
all
while
right,
screen sharing, it's difficult for you to see the other stuff going on, so don't worry about it.
perfect. Thank you. Um, right. You have a right to make a phone call when you're arrested. Calling your attorney, if you call your attorney, right, there's different numbers. There's like a different system for your attorney to call you. The police cannot listen to your conversations with your lawyer. The police can and most likely are listening to your conversations with your spouse, your friend, your brother, your parents, right? They are going to listen to those conversations. Those aren't private. But your conversations with an attorney are. And I think that's important for people to know. Something too, right, is preparing in case you are arrested. For have a family plan, right? Your spouse knows who to call, your children know who to go to. Um, these situations, nobody ever really wants to plan for them, but when they happen, right, without a plan, everybody kind of runs in different directions. So if everybody knows what to do if something happens, who to go to, um, you know, medications and everything like that, it's important as a family to, uh, have those conversations and have a plan. All right. So that's generally interacting with law enforcement. Um, going to segue into just briefly, right, your rights as a traveler. As a U.S. citizen, you cannot be denied entry back to the United States. Um, they have to let you return to the United States. Now, with that said, they can make your life difficult. They can stop you. They can detain you. They can ask you questions. Um, and so, right, they can't prevent you, but they can make life difficult. We've had people held at the border for 6 hours. We've had people held 8 hours. Um, right, because when you're traveling, when you're at a port of entry, Customs and Border Patrol, they can seize electronic devices. TSA, they can seize electronic devices, right? Um, if you're a US citizen and they ask to see your device, our recommendation is to never willingly give law enforcement your phone, right? Um, with that said, they have the right to seize it. So if you say no, you're not going to go through your phone, you're not going to open it right there for them. Um, So sorry. Um, sorry, my cat's like scratching in the background. So if they ask us, right, ask to see your phone, say no. If they go on to seize it, then they can seize it. But when they take that, you're not standing with them going through it, right? You're going to just go on your way, travel. They're going to send you your phone back in a week, few days, right? They'll take that phone. What they do with it, we don't know 100%, right? They still need supervisory approval on their end to search your phone. What they see, we're not entirely sure. But if you're a US citizen, that prevents any opportunity for them to be going back and forth with you. Oh, what's this picture? Oh, who's this person? Right? They really do put that pressure. They're trying to map out connections. They're trying to it seems like they're really trying to get tabs on the Muslim community, right? Who knows who, who's interacting with who. They'll look through your chats, they'll look through a lot of things. Oh, when was the last time you interacted with this specific individual? Um, Lots of times they do have some specific thing they might, be looking for. But lots of times these are like fishing, they turn into fishing expeditions. They're going to try to find whatever they can find. So if you're there, you open, a lot of people are like, oh, I have nothing to hide. Here's my phone. But then all of a sudden you start, it's hours going back and forth. And something that we're seeing too, or hearing anecdotally, is right, the US citizens who speak English, like even, born here, right, speaking English, but Muslim, they have nothing to hide. They're interacting with law enforcement. They're answering the questions. But because these individuals speak English and are cooperating, they're holding them for a long time, asking them a lot of questions. Like, oh, we're getting a lot of information from here. Um, some of the people who don't speak English, they're using Google Translate and they're getting fed up with the situation and they just have those people move on, right? So if you're a US citizen, don't give them your phone willingly. If they're going to seize it, they're going to seize it. You'll get it back, right? Um, Now, if you're not a US citizen and they ask, to go through your phone, you have to show them, right? You have to like listen to like orders from immigration officers. And that's when they will look to see, oh, like why were you at this protest? Or, you know, what are your what are your thoughts on this political organization or this group or something like that? Now, theoretically, law enforcement cannot perform stops or searches based solely on race, religion, national origin, sex, or ethnicity. I think most Muslims who've traveled have been stopped, right? This doesn't really seem like it makes sense, but they say, oh, well, we're not stopping you because of your religion. We're stopping you because of your name, uh, your age, um, the places that you travel to frequently, right? That's why it's pinging our interest. Not necessarily that you're Muslim, but all the factors that come with being Muslim, essentially, right? Um, so if you are traveling, right, US citizens, don't give the passwords, don't give device access. If you're a US citizen, you have to answer questions related to your identification and your travels. Anything else, just say, I'm not going to answer anything that's not related to my identification and to my travels, right? Um, they start asking you, what are your thoughts on this political event or this war or this, right? You don't have to answer those questions as a US citizen. As non-citizens, it becomes um, a trickier area. That's why, too, our recommendation is for non-citizens that have a lot of stuff like that on their phone to not have that on their phones, but also to actually really limit travel, right? Um, Take precautions, right? Delete your social media before going, log out of social media, log out of different things. Have a travel phone, right? Some people call it a burner phone, a travel phone. I know online people are like, oh, right, why would you need a burner phone to travel? That must mean you're doing something illegal. People do this all the time for work. People do this all the time for school. You have a device that you use to travel that doesn't have everything about your life, right? Even if you just lose it abroad, right? Someone has access to everything about your life. You don't need that. And it's safer to just have what you want for travel, right? Um, sorry, 1 second. Can you still see my screen?
We can see your screen, Adam. I think maybe let me just like try something and then we can figure out if,
Yeah.
yeah, we can see your screen. I think your video disappeared, but we can see your screen. You can, I
Oh,
think, continue.
okay, perfect.
So,
So
yeah.
all
Now
right,
you're back on. Yeah.
okay. Sorry for on my end. I'm trying to find the PowerPoint again. But so who is ICE, right? ICE is all over the news. We're seeing a lot of this. ICE has existed under, right, the Department of Homeland Security, the U.S. Department of Homeland
Adam,
Security.
sorry to interrupt you, said, but would you be able to either make it larger or do
Oh,
like a larger screen because we are
okay.
seeing the
Yeah.
so
Okay. Like
smaller
that. Does
portion?
that work?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. So, right after September 11th, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security was combined, took a bunch of different law enforcement agencies and kind of put them under this big umbrella of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Um, Immigration related issues, agencies were put under the Department of Homeland Security, right? So USCIS, that's who deals with immigration petitions, applications, they adjudicate those, right? So for anybody who immigrated, they submitted their stuff through USCIS. Now, US Customs and Border Protection, they patrol the ports of entry and the border and 100 miles from the border. Um, and then ICE, right? US Immigration Customs Enforcement. ICE enforces the immigration laws within the US. Some things that they do, right? Arrests, workplace raids, detention, deportation, removal proceedings. ICE frequently works with other law enforcement agencies, federal law enforcement agencies, local law enforcement agencies. Now, something as a community that we really try to work on, and Ahmet does a lot of work in this area, is to make sure that our local law enforcement agencies, our local governments are not cooperating with ICE beyond the extent that they legally have to, right? Um, that's, you know, minimal. None is the best, right? But some law enforcement agencies are going over and beyond what they are supposed to do necessarily as local law enforcement agencies to help enforce immigration um, laws. But as a community, we're really pushing and like trying to push back against elected officials who are trying, to cooperate and work with ICE. Now, ICE, right? I think what we see in the on the news and seeing in person, right, that ICE doesn't really play fair. And this was even before this past year and before the recent, few months of like how things have escalated. But they collect data, they use unmarked cars, right? They're not showing up usually in an ICE or a DHS car, right? They're like white vans, white trucks, white pickup trucks. Um, they do come very early in the morning. I know that was one of the questions we had gotten before the presentation was like, do they work 9 to 5? They don't work 9 to 5. And oftentimes they come very early in the morning, right? 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock a.m. Catches people off guard. And that's what we're seeing, right? They'll conduct collateral arrests, arrest somebody, um, because they want to like they want to get someone. They can't get that individual. They might arrest their spouse or their child and then say, hey, if you turn yourself in, we'll let this person go. They try to obtain private information from cell phones. Two, they pretend to be the FBI, IRS, police. You know, they aren't identifying themselves. They aren't saying from, I'm from ICE, I'm from Immigration Customs Enforcement. They're not saying this. They're sometimes pretending to be IRS agents, right? Get you talking about something where you don't think it's immigration related, and then will then try to arrest you, right? These are the things that ICE have been doing. Recently, too, we're seeing, right, they're shooting people, right? They're attacking people. Um, they are passing around internal memos saying that they don't have to listen to the Fourth Amendment, that a, and we'll get to this in a second, but they're saying that they can just go into somebody's house and arrest them if they have a warrant of removal. Um, so, right, these are general basics that if you are interacting with ICE, remain silent, right? You don't have to answer questions related to your immigration status, right? If the answer is not the answer that they will be looking for when they ask you about your immigration status, you have the right to remain silent, right? Speak to a lawyer, don't sign anything. Sometimes they're convincing people, well, they say, oh, sign this and you can go home. But like people are signing, you know, like signing to say that they will self-deport or self-remove, right? Ask for an interpreter. You have the right um, to understand what's being asked, what you need to provide. If you're a foreign national, you can call your consulate, right? And they can provide some type of resources for you. Now, if ICE shows up to your house without a judicial warrant, do not let them in. Deny entry into your home, your car, office, refuse to show foreign identity documents, refuse a search of your pockets and belongings. One thing that's like very, very, very important is to never lie or show false documents, right? Those are different crimes that then actually more negatively impact your immigration status, right? Those then would be like fraudulent. If you provide a right, if it's a social security number, right? Not having a social security number and not saying anything is better than not having a social security number and providing a false one, right? That can lead to more serious consequences. Now, what does ICE need in order to go into your house, right? They need a judicial warrant or consent. Without either one of those, right, ICE cannot go into your house. So generally, showing up to people's houses, ICE does not usually have a judicial warrant. Judicial warrants are signed off by judges for crimes committed, right, in their jurisdiction. These situations when ICE is going to somebody's house, they're not going to enforce a specific like Pennsylvania crime or a federal crime, right? So they're not usually showing up with judicial warrants. They almost never have a judicial warrant. Um, Now, with letting them into your house, right, they might say they're somebody else. They might say they're a different organization. They use tricks, they lie. They may try to intimidate you to let them in, right? If you let us in, um, or even tricking, right? If you let us in, nothing's going to happen, but then something happens, right? So we went through this earlier, right? Here is a judicial warrant signed by a judge. Um, United States District Court. That's for federal search warrant or federal crime if it's an arrest warrant. In Pennsylvania, say Commonwealth of Pennsylvania at the top here, but it'll also have your name, address, and it'll be signed off by a judge, right? Now, ICE, typically, this is what they have. Um, this is a warrant of removal or warrant of deportation. This means that internally, right, within the immigration system. Now, it's important to note, and this is why these types of warrants don't allow ICE into your house, is that right, the prosecution and the immigration judges, they all work for the same boss, right? The Attorney General, Pam Bondi, is the boss of ICE. She's the boss of the immigration judges. She's the boss of the Board of Immigration Appeals, right? So that's all under one branch. That's all under the under one agency, the DOJ. There is no um Article 3 judge. There is no um so right with our separation of powers, right? You have executive, the legislature, and you have the judiciary. In this context, the judiciary is not a part of the judiciary, right? The immigration judges are part of the executive branch. They respond, they get orders from the executive branch. So there is no impartial judicial process. So because of that, that doesn't give them a right to break into somebody's home to arrest somebody for immigration purposes, right? Um, it does allow ICE to arrest somebody on the out in public, right? So if ICE has this warrant of removal for an individual, they can't go into that individual's home uh, and just arrest them. But if that individual, is walking out to the street to their car before they get into their car, or something theoretically, ICE could detain that individual. So that, right, for individuals that do have um, or who do not have, right, a legal status, or who are concerned, remaining in the home in certain times would be a beneficial or possibly the safest route, right? Because law enforcement, ICE cannot come in without this signed judicial warrant. Um, if they show you this, right, they'll say, "Oh, we have a warrant. You have to let us in." You look at it. No, this is from ICE. They're giving you their own warrant. No, that like you don't have to let them in.
And there's a quick request for you to go to the previous slide and to show the judicial warrants once again.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
So, hold on a second. Okay. So right here with the warrant, it says United States District Court at the top. Uh, this is for a federal search warrant, right? It's going to have the individual's name, um, their address, right? The residence of so and so located at blah blah blah. Um, then at the bottom, it has to be signed by a judge, right? If any of this information is wrong and law enforcement comes, say this is wrong, this is incorrect. Um, you know, they should have to go through the hurdles of getting it corrected, right? It might not be that much of a hurdle. They might just call and be like, "Oh, we got the address wrong," but make sure that it's correct, right? So this is what they need. Now, if it's now most of the time too, right? If ICE is coming to your house, they most of the time do not have this judicial warrant, right? So almost all the time they will have right this warrant through ICE. That doesn't give them the right to come in, but this one does.
Yeah.
Uh, and
Adam, there is a question. There are two questions. The second one, I can briefly also touch upon. But the first, the first I want to convey to you this one. The question is, you mentioned that we should call a lawyer, but what kind of a lawyer should we be calling? How do we know the lawyer is qualified to deal with ICE-related issues? Should we have already talked to a lawyer beforehand? And the question is concerning both American citizens as well as legal residents. And there's a secondary question about what can CAIR do in these situations? How can CAIR help in these situations that we can touch upon as well? Um,
yeah, no, thank you. I think right, there's the questions, alhamdulillah, they overlap, right? So, um, what kind of lawyer, right? If you are detained by ICE, an immigration attorney, that deals with ICE. So how do we know whether an attorney is qualified to deal with ICE related issues? You know, usually, and in this situation, our recommendation is if you have any concerns about this, right? And I would say particularly not for US citizens, for non-citizens. If you have concerns, I think it's very important to have some type of relationship with an immigration attorney, right? Being in contact with them, um, letting them know your situation so that they have to all of your contact information, your spouse's contact information, your immigration number, everything, right? Then that attorney will be aware of your situation. And if something happens, right, that's who you should call. That's who your spouse, that's who your family should call if something happens to you, right? Now, CARE, we don't do direct immigration work. We do civil rights work. Now, but with immigration stuff, we do partner with immigration attorneys and other organizations that do provide this direct immigration work. So, right, one thing you can always do, um, in an emergency or even before an emergency happens, right? Before there is any type of arrest or anything like that. If you want to reach out to us at CARE saying, "Hey, I need help. Whatever your situation is, if you let us know, then we can try to set you up with an attorney um that you can connect with, right? We have Muslim attorneys and then we also have non-Muslim attorneys who are like allies of our community and wanting to help our community right now. So we can definitely hook you up with those individuals. But if you do have concerns, definitely contact an attorney beforehand, right? Because that's the thing too. When now some of this judicial, like the legal stuff is still up in the air, and we don't have clear rules and clear decisions by the judges yet. Um, but depending on how quick an attorney can file something on your behalf, can impact your case very much, right? Like Mahmoud Khalil's lawyers were able to file something when he was in transit to before he got to New Orleans. He was in New Jersey when they filed it, so technically, the New Jersey court retained jurisdiction. Now, some stuff came out with that case that's not favorable, right? But he's still out because of that. So if you have a relationship with an attorney beforehand, they have all your stuff, they can file something right away. Um, for US citizens, I this should not be concerned, right? US citizens where they need to be concerned about with ICE is right is actually interfering with ICE, right? Because ICE can arrest US citizens if they are interfering or they commit some type of crime or they assault an ICE agent or something like that. They can arrest US citizens in those situations. So that's where a US citizen would have to be concerned. But other than that, I don't think there would be any reason for a US citizen to have to reach out. If someone's a naturalized US citizen and they are concerned because of the rhetoric going around, um, and maybe what the administration wants to do or not, and they have questions, reach out to CARE. We can try to, talk about it with you and say, oh, we probably say like, well, right now there's nothing to worry about. There is no distinction, right? Um, yeah. So,
Yeah, no, thank you, Adam. And just like, one quick thing to add is, again, like in some levels of assistance that we are able to provide, we don't make this public. So we just like, encourage you to reach out, so that, we can discuss that specific to your situation as well. So yeah, that's just that much I wanted to add. And also bring in an additional question that came in on the Q&A side, which is how does ICE decide which places and houses to target? And I see
um,
that you have brought on the sensitive locations slide. So if you can also talk about, yeah, what does this mean for masjids,
yeah.
Islamic schools, and such would be helpful as well.
Um, so how does ICE decide? We don't know 100%. Lots of times though, right, it's tips, right? That someone calls someone and puts them on their radar, right? I think the quota that they're shooting for is like 3,000 arrests every day. They're not hitting that quota. They weren't hitting that quota. Um, I still don't think that they're doing 3,000 arrests every day, but that's what they're told, right? They have this type of quota, this direction over their head. So they're gonna go for what's easiest. Um, Unfortunately, right? It goes against the rhetoric of, oh, we're only, going after, people with violent criminal backgrounds or criminal convictions, right? Those individuals are probably harder to get to, harder to arrest, harder to detain. Individuals who cooperate with ICE and been cooperating with ICE for the past, 5 years, doing check-ins and stuff like that, if they can find people on technicalities, if that can help boost their numbers, that's possibly, what they're going to do. It's right. The incentive is is bad there, right? So it is encouraging them to arrest like whoever they can. So, right, I mean, they'll get calls from like, spouses fighting with each other or something, right? They might act on that. Oh, someone called, they said this, blah, 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 and they might go and act on that, right? So, um, yeah. Now, with that, right, typically ICE, right, under the Obama administration, they passed a memo. It was a policy memo saying that ICE, they weren't going to do immigration enforcement activities at sensitive locations. So at schools, places of worship, hospitals, religious ceremonies, marches, parades, rallies, right? They weren't going to enforce immigration activities there unless there was a national security or that, a risk for bodily, like serious bodily harm and things like that, right? They were doing that because they want individuals to be able to go to the hospital, right, and not be scared. They want people to go to places of worship, right, and not be worried that something's going to happen to them. Them if everybody stopped going, to the masjid because they're afraid they're going to get deported, like theoretically that could be infringing on your First Amendment rights to practice your religion. Um, so they passed this, and that's typically how it was. That's how it was under the Trump administration, the first go around. That's how it was under the Biden administration. But last year, Trump rescinded that memo. So basically, leaving the door open to conducting immigration activities at these places. Um, Now, with that, what, right, we talked about ICE needs a warrant to go into private places. Um, So that same logic, that same like legal reasoning applies to these places. However, right, these places are weird. They're hybrid, like kind of public, kind of private. So how does that make sense? We are trying to say, and what we're saying is like ICE is not welcome in masjids, that the masjids are only open for individuals who pray, who are coming to pray. Um, with that said, though, right, any Muslim traveling across America, you find a mosque, you go in there, right? I've never been asked, for any type of test or to do it, right? I'm just welcomed in. It's a generally open space. So theoretically, if anybody from the public can go into there, ICE can do the same thing, theoretically, right? Um, we still would recommend putting signs up that say, ICE, like ICE can't come in, or that this is a private location only for congregants, right? Now, how much will that hold up in court? That's still up in the air. But I think to protect ourselves, right? I think baseline, we need to assume that they theoretically can come in, right, to open areas of the masjid. So in the prayer area, right? Anybody can go there. ICE theoretically can go there. Now, any places in the masjid that are blocked off and locked off to the public, ICE would need a warrant to go back to those areas of the masjid. So masjids can think about, if they do have individuals that are concerned, right? Maybe they are in a different location of the masjid, in a private area. right? Masjids that have schools in them, right? Like the school should be separate from right where the general public can just walk into, usually a locked door or something or a code or something like that. That would be a private area that ICE would need a warrant to go into, like 100%. We would still make the argument, right? If ICE comes to the mosque and is arresting people while they're praying or before they're praying, right? We will try to fight that. Uh, but where it ends up, like where a judge will fall on that, we don't know for sure. We do know the private areas of masjid 100% they need a warrant to get to. Um, so, right, ICE cannot go to private spaces unless they have your permission or judicial warrant. Again, they almost never have a judicial warrant, so do not give them permission or consent. This also applies to locked cabinets, electronic devices. Unless you're giving it to them, unless you're opening the cabinets, right? If it's locked, they need a warrant in order to search that. Um, Now, if ICE does want to speak to you or they want you to come in, have an attorney go with you. Um, are there any questions on ICE? I think because, yeah.
Yeah, Adam, there are two questions. One is because there are concerns that, ICE is also doing arrests regarding like American citizens or children, right? So sometimes, these are like, those who are like, protecting others or even like, we've seen in Minnesota, right? So like people are being asked like, if they don't have an ID on them and then if they have an accent, for example, they might get arrested. So the question is, given all of that's happening, what documents should we be carrying with us at all times? Should we be carrying passports and birth certificates for children to prove citizenship? Um, so that's the question. And then like, the other related question is, when are American citizens obligated to identify themselves or to present IDs, say on the street or like if stopped in traffic, not by say like, a traffic related incident, but like, say ICE or as such.
Okay. Um, so we'll start with the first question. What documents, right? So legally, you're not required to walk around with any documents on you at all times. But practically, the passport card, right? You can get the passport book, but they also have, it looks like a driver's license, but it says passport. The passport cards seem to be a very practical solution during this time, right? Because you can keep that in your wallet, or wherever you keep all your other cards, right? The passport book itself is bigger. You want to keep that for traveling and things like that, right? But the passport card, if you keep that on you, that is like it should be a foolproof way. Even you have an accent, you have a driver's license, they're like, oh, well, we don't know if you're a citizen or not, or, whatever. But if you have a passport card right there that you just hand them, that's the best solution, right? And I think for the children, the passport card as well. Um, I don't want like people we shouldn't have to be in a time where like people are walking around with their children's birth certificates, right? I think having pictures of them on your phone that you can access would be beneficial. Um, and right, it comes down to the individual person, right? If it would make you feel better, having a copy of the passport theoretically should, if ICE is detaining somebody who's an American, because they don't look a particular way or they look a certain way that ICE says, okay, they're probably not American. Um, you sorry, but yeah, so the
Yeah.
passport card, sorry, but the passport card I think would be the best in that situation. If you want to keep it, the like copies, if that gives you like that should help in the situation, but I also don't think that like we should as a society be at a point where everybody's carrying around, right, their birth certificates. Um, So I don't know, Ahmed, do you have anything else on that?
Yeah, no, no, absolutely. I mean that makes sense, and I think that's the best advice that we see from immigration attorneys and others as well. Obviously, I think like as a reminder, green card holders are obligated to carry their green cards with them, right? So for students, there's advice that all should have like their valid sort of like DS documents and as such on them. So yeah, that's an advice that we can maybe give. Um, Adam, if you're able to maybe like stop screen share and then go from there, I'll like I mentioned like switch to something, but I'll still be like keeping an ear out over here.
So, so stop share.
Yeah, so like are there any other questions? I think let me see. Um there is a question that says there's been talk that Philadelphia and surrounding areas are on the agenda for a surge. Based on your estimation, do you think we are ready or that we are taking this seriously enough? Maybe I can quickly answer this question, Adam. One thing like that I want to mention is that we work together with our allies. Similarly, CARE Pittsburgh on the Pittsburgh side works with allies on the ground that sort of like allows us to be prepared and to hopefully respond to any challenges that might come from the overall landscape. So there is a lot of work that's going on neighborhood by neighborhood, area by area, for there to be like that idea of we keep us safe, right? So like our community is helping one another. But at the same time, right, so like the level of funding that the federal government is making available to these agencies is truly scary, and that I think in terms of a legal capacity, every immigration attorney that we know is really full to the brim. Nonprofits that are able to do immigration work are really like very very busy. Many that used to do resettlement work, right? So like their funding has been completely gutted, so they are trying to sometimes pivot into this line, but they are very busy. So in all honesty, I think like if you are being real, no, like it's going to be difficult, and that we need to be prepared for it. But at the same time, that shouldn't give us into a defeatist idea. In Pittsburgh, in Minnesota, what we saw, and like we see and talk to our colleagues from CARE over there as well, is that once faith communities, other nonprofits, everyday citizens come together, right? So like then there are levels of help that we are able to extend to one another and take care of like community members. It may not prevent every instance of injustice, but it's still meaningful and still needed. Again, like particularly in case of an ICE detainment, right? So like we do have the issue of like those who are remaining, like if a loved one is detained, then the remaining family is often trying to scramble where to pay, how to pay the rent, how to get food, how to get diapers for the babies, and as such, we have many cases locally in our area where these needs are very urgent, and then we are reaching out to our partners, our masajid, sometimes like other nonprofits to speak to that challenge. Um, One sort of like question that we are seeing that I'm seeing, Adam, is an issue with the passport card. So like to the need to send the passport away for some time to get the passport card, and the copies like should the copies be notarized, or should copies be sufficient enough at this stage, if that's happening. I'll tell that I'm seeing like some of these processes actually you can expedite, and of course that would be a cost associated with expedition, but particularly of course like if you're traveling or if you're able to maybe using the expedited service, in my experience and like what I'm hearing is has worked for some, and like that period of staying without a passport or as such, like it has been limited. But Adam, so I guess the concrete question is, if we are carrying copies of any documents, should those be notarized?
Um, so like with your birth certificate or something, right? Like, do you keep the original on you? I think a copy would be fine. Um, I still like, I don't think that that's I think the course of action. I still think it would just be get the passport card. If you want that extra protection now, a copy of it should be fine. Right. Now, still with that, right, with the passport card, if you show them the passport card right then and there, they can't deny that, right? Um, if you're like, oh, I have a copy of my birth certificate or something, theoretically they might say, or on the spot they could like check it with your ID and see it's the same person and then let you go. Or they might say, oh, we still have to like look into this too, right? So I do think the passport card is the most foolproof one. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
thank you. Thank you, Adam. Thank you so much for everyone's feedback. Let me quickly see. I think we have answered all of the questions. Like, briefly before we wrap up, I want to sort of like, share the links that I shared earlier in the chat, right? So like this is the page where we have the like, the visual and like, more print sort of like, friendly know your rights documents, right? So some of them are about employers, right? So what do you need to do? Like, some of them essentially like, give us like, the cycle of like, what are specific steps that employers can do to protect their employees. Again, quick overview of what Adam has emphasized, right? So like, know your rights in your homes, and like, some information about like, travel and the USCIS memos that came up, as well as steps about like, during detainment or after detainment or before detainment, what are the specific things that particular community members who are at risk need to take. We Let me also bring the CARE Pittsburgh's ICE toolkit, right? So like, there is a very helpful toolkit here from CARE Pittsburgh, including some digital security guidance and other checklists and legal forms as well. Really encourage everyone to benefit from this, as well as I think like, briefly, if it's okay, Adam, like, also we can just like, in 5 minutes also touch on Ramadan and the Ramadan accommodations, maybe in workplace and educational settings, very briefly, and then we can go from there. But again, we have our toolkits as well as accommodation letters for schools and employees to use. In different settings, as well as some graphic versions on this page, pa.care.com/Ramadan. But with that, I'm going to maybe if in a few minutes we can talk about Ramadan related aspects, and we can go from there, inshallah.
Perfect. Inshallah. Um, hmm. All right. So I'm just gonna talk here, I think. So rights in the workplace, right? So generally, with our constitutional protections and the Civil Rights Act, right, we have the right for fairness in hiring, firing, training, and promotion, working in a non-hostile work environment. You have the right to report discrimination, but really key to our practices is receiving reasonable accommodations for your religious practices and observances, right? So the key word is reasonable accommodations. Your employer has to try to provide reason, or your employer has to provide reasonable accommodations if it does not create an undue burden for your employer. So it's a balancing test, right? There's not one concrete law in the United States that says you have to be able to pray at work whenever you want to, or something like that. But the law says that your employer has to provide reasonable accommodations. So how does that apply right during Ramadan? So, you know, I, at work, right, schedule shifts. If your schedule, right, you usually like sometimes people will have their request to have, their times shifted a little bit, either, so they can break the fast or so they can break the fast at work or that they can get done earlier to go home and break the fast. Now, if that's something that wouldn't create an undue burden for your employer, then they have to provide those types of accommodations. If you want time to pray, right, at work, if it doesn't create an undue burden, they have to permit you that time to pray. Off, requesting off for religious holidays, right? Um, if it doesn't create an undue burden for your employer, they have to let you take off for Eid. Um, right now, this is a balancing test. So if you feel like you need some type of accommodations or your employer is not letting you practice your religion how you want to, right? There's two options. One, you can work with them, reach out to us, we'll work with them to either explain why the accommodations are needed, to provide more background information, things like that, or you can sue them if they don't provide, the religious accommodations. I think generally, how we work and trying to build relationships with the community, right? We would much rather to just get on a call with your employer, explain the situation, and come up to a workable solution. Um, but a key thing though is reasonable, right? Some people like an hour for Juma prayer. If you can take out an hour lunch and it doesn't matter to your employer when you're there or not there, right? That shouldn't be a problem to get off for Juma. If you work in a place where you're the only person at the front desk, all day long, that's going to be a harder balancing test, right, with the employer. But those are things that we can work with you to try and get. Um, Same things, right? Then with schools, right? You know, at schools, you're allowed to wear your religious clothing. I know during Ramadan too, right? People do wear more religious clothing, right? And your school has to permit you to do that. Um, if other students, right, can pray or can participate in activities, you have the right to pray at school. Um, Now, the one thing is that schools can limit speech and your freedom of religion and things like that if it creates a material disruption to the school. But if it doesn't create a material disruption to the school, they have to permit you to practice your religion. Now, with schools, right, there's a lot more, I think, involved with accommodations for schools, right? Lots of times for years, right, the PSSA testing window was entirely during Ramadan, right? It's like for years. Getting accommodations for it to not be during Ramadan, um, those are the types of things that we can try to work uh, with you to get, right? Taking these tests that impact, right, your future educational outcomes and things like that, you can get those postponed until afterwards. If you need off for Eid, right, you can get those, right? We have like templates online where you can plug in your information, submit it to your school. It explains why your student needs off, provide some religious basis, right? Schools have to permit that. Now, a lot of schools have added Eid to the calendars, right? Alhamdulillah, the work that the Muslim community is doing um, to get that. But even if you don't have Eid on your calendar, right, you can take off. Um, Trying to think, is there anything else particular, Ahmed, am I missing
No,
for
I think
the
this
accommodation?
is this is this is what we what we have briefly intended to share. As always, right? So like every individual case is different. Sometimes our templates will work, and you can just copy it from the templates from the links that we have shared. And let me try to put them again if anybody maybe has joined later on. But please always feel free to to reach out to us, such that we can be helpful to you, specific to your case. Um, there's a question, Adam. How about asking for time off for Eid, like Christmas or Easter holiday, meaning to be in the calendar? Can we demand for this to be at the school calendar, like holidays? Yeah, so Alhamdulillah, we now have over 20 school districts in Pennsylvania that has Eid off as an official school holiday on the calendar. And we have a very sort of straightforward plan in terms of how to get this done. So if your district currently doesn't have this, we'll be very happy to work with you to get that done, inshallah. So some of the templates on that is also on our websites, but please feel free to reach out to us. I think I can put here my email address and phone number. So inshallah, feel free to copy, reach out, and I'll be happy to connect you to our education team and to our legal team as well, inshallah.
Yeah, thank you. Brother Zachary, yeah, would definitely love to connect. Now, there is no single right that we can demand it on the calendar and they have to put it, but through advocacy measures, because it's in the discretion of the school districts for which holidays they have, right? So some school districts that have like a large student population have a lot of the Jewish holidays off. Some school districts that don't have a large Jewish population don't have those days off, right? So you working, alhamdulillah, Brother Zachariah, working with people like you who have some influence, right, on the school board, um, we can try to get that added. So we'd definitely love to help out however we can with that. Perfect. Does anybody have any additional questions or anything before we wrap up?
Sister Christine, I thought I see a note from Sister Christine about let me I can't copy your message, Sister Christine. Let me just see. Could you try now to see if you can send Sister Christine? Sister Christine, our CAIR Pittsburgh Executive Director, also wanted to put in the chat her information. Sister Christine, if you're able to copy or put it again, that'd be great. Then I think we can, once Sister Christine is able to do that, or let me try to see. Uh, Yeah, thank you. I think we both put down, so you now see Mr. Christine, Mohammed's email address and number for Pittsburgh as well. With that, I think we are going to wrap up tonight's session. Jazakumullah khair to everyone. Thank you so much to everyone for joining, for your questions, for your engagement. Adam, thank you so much again for leading us in this direction. We'll likely be able to put the recording of this on our YouTube channel very soon. Please feel free to check and share with your contacts so that hopefully we can make sure that many more in our communities are educated and know their rights and hopefully also know how to reach out to us on which issues. We are always ready to engage with all of you. Jazakumullah khair. Assalamu alaikum. Inshallah, Ramadan Mubarak. Early Ramadan Mubarak to everyone. We pray for a fruitful, peaceful Ramadan for all of us in our communities at home and abroad, inshallah ta'ala. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi. Have a good night.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.